Welcome. My name is Thomas Benjoe, and I'm the President and CEO of FHQ Developments. I am also a member of the Muscopheating First Nation, which is located here within the Treaty 4 territory and a part of the File Hills Qu'Appelle Tribal Council. Our organization actually serves 11 nations and over 16,000 citizens. And our job as a development corporation is to explore new opportunities, new investments, and create an ecosystem that supports Indigenous business, not just from a corporate perspective, but also from an entrepreneur's perspective and a nation perspective. And so we have to take into consideration many different factors when we look at the opportunity in different industries. And today, I'm going to speak to you about the future of Indigenous agriculture. And, what is the roadmap that we need to follow in order for that to be successful? I'm not going to talk about all of the great inventions that are happening and great technologies that are to come in the industry. I mean, we're well aware of the transformation that is happening. But what I want to explore a little deeper is how do we make sure that Indigenous people and nations feel a part of the process, feel that they are a part of the industry themselves? How do we make sure that we do that effectively? It starts first with taking a look at some of our history and acknowledging the history that Indigenous people have had as it relates to the ag industry, both from contact and even pre-contact. And, we're going to explore where we are today as Indigenous communities and, what a lot of nations throughout Saskatchewan are currently doing to be active in the ag industry. We're also going to talk about the environment. What's the environment overall in Saskatchewan for opportunity and growth, and what are we seeing? What are we hearing within our economy? We're also going to look at exploring a little bit into policy. How has policy affected our Indigenous participation in the industry? What are some of those historic policies that have affected our participation, and how can we work to change some of those policies so that we are more engaging and that we are more inclusive? And we're going to explore a little bit. We'll talk about FHQ developments and some of the areas that we're investing our time and our strategy in order for us to participate in the industry. And we'll come back to how we actually design this. How do we design participation? How do we design inclusion within the industry? So we'll explore that towards the end of our presentation today. So, when we look at our participation as Indigenous communities in the ag sector, the first thing we need to acknowledge is, why should Indigenous people be a part of the ag industry? We look at the history that Indigenous people have had on these lands for thousands and thousands of years. And, we look at the food security that we've been able to create prior to contact and even now during contact with Western civilizations and changes to the way that we manage the land. And we look at some of the success that Indigenous communities have had over time. We've had here in Saskatchewan, we've actually have a history of very, very successful Indigenous farming practices located even in one of our communities for our tribal council, Pepeeksies First Nation. We actually had farming projects that were very, very successful, but unfortunately, the success of that was eroded by the people that surrounded the community. They created barriers once they became too successful as nations. And so, we have some tough situations, some tough issues that we've had to deal with as Indigenous people trying to participate in this industry. Policies, government, individuals over time have affected our participation, but we're still continuing to be resilient. We still continue to want to be in this industry. And so when we look at the history and now look at where we want to go as nations, it's more and more the issue around food security becomes an issue. We have climate change, we have the want or desire to be able to go back to some of our original ways of living off of the land. And so food security becomes a major issue for us. We also look at the stewardship. How do we ensure that when we are creating opportunity in our communities, that there is good stewardship on how we develop, on how we produce food? Those considerations will go hand in hand. And historically, we've always done that as nations. We always are mindful of stewardship and mindful of when we take things, we put back and we respect Mother Earth and all that she gives us. We look at the growth of our population. Indigenous people in Saskatchewan, our population currently under the age of 19, 36.2% of our population is Indigenous, under the age of 19. That is going to grow. And so when you look at participation in the ag industry, almost 40% of our population in the next 15 to 20 years is going to be Indigenous. What are organizations doing today to help with that? And how do we ensure that 40% of the population is participating in one of Saskatchewan's major economies and industries? Another very, very important aspect is Indigenous knowledge, and I don't think we take enough time to respect what that means and what value that actually brings to different industries. Bringing Indigenous knowledge and thought and values into the way that we operate our businesses or bring to practice in our operations. Those are very, very valuable opportunities that I think sometimes the business community misses out on. So, where are we today? We look at nations across the province. We're involved in farming. We're producers. We do have nations that are grain farming, and we do have a lot of communities that do deal with livestock. And actually, we actually have quite a number of our own nations within our tribal council that have become owners of bison. So the bison industry is now growing within our economies as a tribal council. We also look at things like gardening. We have very large-scale gardening projects happening in northern Saskatchewan with many different Indigenous communities. And they're going to continue to participate at that level and be able to provide their produce and their services in that industry. Where are we exploring? I think some of the things that our communities have been exploring is greenhouses. We're looking at vertical growing and getting an understanding of what those opportunities may be in that particular industry and how we leverage that technology into the future. Other things like aquaponics has been a part of our exploring new opportunities and I know a lot of our nations are trying to identify how that is going to work within their economies and within their economic development efforts. And so we have all of these opportunities that our nations are participating in today that they want to grow and expand. And so in acknowledging where our nations are starting today, you know, what does the Saskatchewan context look like? What does the Saskatchewan economy look like? What does the industry look like? And I think what we've seen, especially within these past few years, is a major investment in the protein industry. Producing protein crops, creating, trying to create value add for those producers that are within the province. And you know, we're seeing tremendous growth in that part of the ag sector. We are going to become more and more relied upon as a province and as a country to produce more and more food. Hence the reason around protein and the demand for protein around the world. I mean, there's only so much animal protein that our world will have access to, you know, and where is our ever-growing population going to be able to get that protein from? And we look at the protein that's being developed here in Saskatchewan. So there's tremendous opportunity in the protein sector that we need to be very, very aware of as nations, but also as an industry. The value add opportunities for those industries, there's, you know, numerous manufacturing opportunities. There's all of these great new businesses that can be created to add value to the protein industry that can be grown here at home, rather than, you know, shipping off all of our protein crops to other countries and having them value added outside of our economy. We also look at the big shift in ag tech. You look at the investments from Innovation Saskatchewan, and we look at the Saskatchewan Growth Plan as it relates to growing the tech, manufacturing, and supply chain sector of our industry. Now, there's going to be significant investments there. There's going to be supports that are going to be in place to help that sector grow. And so how do we make sure that nations are able to gain access to those opportunities and are situated strategically so that they can benefit from this shift in strategy and growth of that part of the industry? We also look at things like transport, realizing that Saskatchewan is landlocked, right? We don't have port. But we look at the investments from organizations like AGT Foods, making significant investments into northern Manitoba and actually partnering with Indigenous communities, which I'm very, very proud to see that happen, and giving ownership for those nations in that process. The ability to transport and get our product out to market will only help to grow and increase our competitiveness around the world. One of the other areas I want to speak to is policy. And so, you know, how does policy affects many, many different things. And we look at it from the aspect of our nations. You know, currently, if we're to look at any of our producers in the province and as it relates to policy, we see tons of changes around ESG requirements, and there's more and more talk in the industry around how do we include Indigenous policy and Indigenous engagement in those policies alongside the ESG requirements. And so we're starting to see that change, that shift. And we want to make sure that those organizations that are invested in the sector are giving opportunity for Indigenous communities as well. And so we're going to start to see and hopefully push for more Indigenous engagement policies with those producers, even within Saskatchewan. So how do we make sure that there's specific policies there to help? Some of the other issues that still unfortunately plague our communities is lending. The ability to borrow under the Indian Act on reserve, even from an entrepreneur's perspective. And, I come from a family of farmers, and we didn't have access to capital. We couldn't go to the bank and get a loan and purchase a tractor. We had to save up and utilize and buy used equipment. We've never had a new piece of equipment to be able to use because of the Indian Act and our inability to borrow to be able to participate effectively. So there's changes that need to happen around lending and how we work with nations and individual entrepreneurs on that investment. Active consultation, data collection, awareness, all of these things are happening right now. There's currently work being done to gather all of this information on Indigenous participation. And so, we're actively seeking that information from our communities. So all of these things are going to affect policy over time. So where does FHQ plan to participate? Well, we've been working hard over the past few years to develop an ag investment strategy. So we actually have criteria on how we're going to invest in the sector and identify, key partnerships and relationships that we'll need. Our focus will be on tech, manufacturing, supply chain. Even though I come from a family of farmers, I'm not a very good farmer myself. And so being a part of the producing side is an area where we're not going to move into. But when we look at the opportunities on tech, manufacturing, and supply chain, a lot of our business models will support that type of investment. We're going to develop relationships, key relationships in the community. We're going to look for those key and critical partners that can help us become successful. And we're going to leverage them into our business models. We're also going to work on influencing policy. How do we make sure that we're giving Indigenous voice to the policies that are being created for us, and make sure that we're well aware of the opportunities there. So what does Indigenous participation by design look like? Well, it first starts with the industry. We have to look deeply at the industry itself, and we look at other industries and the development of those industries. And if we look at how other industries have been developed over the years, typically they've left Indigenous inclusion out of their equation for business success. And so what we're going to be asking for is, how do we make sure that we design a system that ensures there is Indigenous participation? We're going to look at the metrics. What are the metrics? What are the key metrics that we need to utilize to recognize and understand that what success looks like? Is it growth? Is it increased investment? Is it increased jobs in that sector? Many different things that we can use to measure success. One of the really important things is actually having a seat at the table. And I think, that is such a major focus of any opportunity for growth or strategy into the future, is making sure that Indigenous people have a seat at the table when we are developing the sector. And so we want to make sure that there's opportunity there. Then we can adjust policy. Then we can align allies and create strategic partners to be able to help us grow in that particular industry. And so to be successful in the future, we must create a system of inclusion, knowledge transfer, and partnership. Those three things are going to be very, very critical. And I think if we do that really well, we'll have greater strategic alignment for our nations. We're going to be able to unlock future investment opportunity in how we make decisions around the types of investments we want to make as Indigenous people and as nations, as dev corps. We'll be able to influence the policy and the strategies and government funding that may come available within the Saskatchewan economy so that it is strategically focused on success. And we'll give that opportunity for Indigenous knowledge to be a part of the business processes and decision-making on creating a sustainable ag strategy. So that's where we need to start. And that is what the future of Indigenous agriculture will look like. Thank you.
We know farming isn't an 8-to-5 business. That's why we want to give you the tools to do business anywhere, anytime. With MyViterra, you have a powerful tool at your fingertips to stay connected no matter where you are. Create online contracts, receive customized alerts, view your account information, and access grain prices in real time. Talk to your rep today and find out more about how you can harness the power of MyViterra, keeping you connected in real time. This is MyViterra.